Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to the latest chapter of Ars Magica, taken from the subreddit HFY. All the relevant links are down below, and please like, comment, and subscribe like any good minion of the algorithm would do. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. I would just like to thank the following Tier 5 patrons and channel members for supporting the channel: Fallen Angel, Buzz Kennington, Data Magnet, and Bob the Dragon. Thank you again. And now, on to the story. Chapter 9. Claw didn't really expect his first foray into the world to certainly become what it has. He had expected to basically get out of the cave, maybe hunt some of the forest creatures, drink some water, find a mate, and basically live out the rest of his days peacefully. He did not expect to run into a giant floating ice. Judging from Gloom's actions, which is what he decided to call the white creature he was following, he didn't think these things deserved any attention whatsoever with how calm he was being. And after a while of walking behind Gloom, he started to feel something he hadn't in a long time. Fear. Something here was causing him to fear for his life. That didn't happen since, forever ago. He only ever knew the fear from when he went on his first hunt. They had encountered, He didn't really remember what the clan had called it. He just knew that it ate a lot of his members whole before dying off. Ever since, the clan designated the forest as apex territory. So feeling like this here seemed off to him, especially since the deeper into the cave was as safe as you could be. Then, he felt something breathing down his neck. He turned around only to find himself face to face with a giant maw. It could crush his head in one bite, and it took the opportunity to do so. Thankfully, it wasn't really strong enough to crush bone, so Claw got in a few swipes, but it didn't seem to do anything to the thing wrapped around his head. Then he began to feel more teeth gnawing on the parts of his body. He started to run in a random direction, hoping to bash them off, or something, but it didn't seem to happen. Claw ended up collapsing on the ground, hearing shrieks go off in his skull, drowning out his own thoughts. Eventually, it all stopped, and he was left in darkness, being slowly fed to the piece that could fit his entire body on their tongues. It was only when he woke up did he realize that he was dreaming. He could really tell that it was happening, nor why he felt that he was in pain. All he knew was that Gloom was in front of him. At first, he tried to get away, but he found that he couldn't control his muscles at all, really. It was as if they wouldn't respond to his will. He didn't like this feeling. Becoming still means becoming someone else's food. Becoming still means starving of hunger and thirst. He silently whispered, as he couldn't even move his mouth. That didn't stop him from tasting something, though. Driven away from his misery, he finally noticed what Gloom was doing. He was feeding him, much like someone would feed a pup. He didn't give him water, but then again, getting the food itself was probably as much as it could do for him, given how tiny it was. He was grateful for the thing's help. He didn't know how it had gotten him out of the situation, but he promised that when it led him back to his pack, he would not eat all of them. Only the scrawny or the old, caring for him, had promised at least that much to Gloom. So he sat there, biding his time till he was able to walk again. He spent it just sleeping or eating, at least until he was rudely awoken. When he came to, he could actually feel his body again. He could tell because he was being crudely dragged towards a bush, while the ground let out the sound of thunder. Groggily, he tried to follow Gloom into the bush. It was a bit of work, but he was able to push himself close to the ground. They were both silent, waiting, watching for whatever was coming. When it first appeared, Claw thought that it looked kind of like he wasn't too sure, but he'd say that it was big, weird-faced, wingless, featherless chicken. He began to suspect, due to its size, that it could easily overpower them at this moment. He wanted to just leave. He didn't see that it had any eyes, so it probably relied on smell. If he just ran downwind, he'd probably not get its attention. However, before he could leave, Gloom grabbed him. Claw looked down to discover that Gloom had drawn something down. Claw wasn't a particularly good artist. He put a paw on a birthstone, same as everyone else, but he didn't find it that important. It was just a bloody paw print after all. See this though, it made him appreciate it. If anyone could draw up plans to hunt prey, or even mark down where they'd been seen it, that would make hunting much easier to do. From what he'd been able to tell, Gloom wanted to get on his back, stalk up to the thing, antagonize it, and then Gloom jumping and throwing his... Claw couldn't really tell what he was drawn there. Claw looked down to see what he was talking about. It seemed like he had made something to wear that held, from what he saw, those mushrooms that had rendered him sick. Oh, he understood now. They were going to sick the creature to death. It wasn't how a hunt normally went, nor was it really honorable. But Claw was on his own now. He no longer had many brothers and sisters supporting him. Only Gloom did. So, with that brief thought, Claw did not see anything wrong with his plan. So he let Gloom onto his back and began to stalk the creature as it ate some of the meats that Gloom had brought. This was Claw's element. This was the reason he was alive. Sure, he used to do this with others before, but now he won't have to share any of the meat. Unless Gloom would like some. He wouldn't mind sharing. There was more than enough meat to go around. It would be fair to say that Claw was more focused on the hunt than the passenger right now. Sure, he'd made sure that Gloom was capable of staying on top of his back. But other than that, Claw was getting a bit bloodthirsty. He hadn't been in a proper hunt in months. His whole clan had to hide in a cave while feasting on the insects and fish that were in there. It wasn't like the good old days anymore. So when the big beast had finally turned its head and roared in challenge, Claw had put the plan of his own and met it with his own. It started out in the best way for Claw. He struck first, dealing a powerful strike against the thing's face, leaving lines of blood dripping. He was then struck back with the foe biting his torso. Sure, it couldn't fit itself entirely around it, but it still punctured a lot of important things in there. So, it could be understood that Claw's fighting capabilities were rapidly decreasing. Especially when the beast seemed to somehow recover from its injuries almost instantly. Claw did fight with all of his might. He broke his namesakes against the thing's hide, before resorting to just tearing at the flesh with his teeth. That was the moment when the fight had turned against him, however. For the beast had decided to do the same around his neck, and with a snap, the fight was over. Claw was tossed aside like a hindrance. He could not feel anything anymore, not even the blood or guts that were starting to leave his body. All he could feel was the warmth of his body leaving him. Claw thought that this was probably one of the better ways that he could go out. It certainly wasn't the best. He hadn't been fighting to protect his clan and dying with honor. He hadn't even secured himself a legacy, but at least he had someone fight by his side till the end. He could barely see Gloom fighting for their lives. His vision was blurring and beginning to darken. From what he could see, Gloom was far more powerful than he had been given credit for. In fact, he probably shouldn't have pushed aside Gloom to begin with. While he may not look all that impressive, neither do white abominations, and they could do much the same as Gloom could with their horns. This, however, had far more power behind it, where the little ones had ones that shot out only a fair few paws away from their horns. Gloom's could travel at least a grown clanmate's length while still retaining the power. All too soon, Gloom could see that the whole that had done nothing, much like Claw's powerful strikes. Even though he couldn't see it, he was sure that Gloom was visibly smirking as the thing opened its maw to swallow him whole. And then Gloom tossed the mushrooms in. The foe swallowed it whole, like a fool, and had instantly taken to sickening effects. The plan had been completed. They had taken it down, even if it cost Claw his life. This was a much better ending than he thought he'd receive otherwise. Rather than dying and being eaten by his foe, he had fallen in the hunt, a victorious one at that. No greater honor could be bestowed upon the lone warrior. He smiled a bit. It was the only thing that he could control with his limited muscles. He could see Gloom finally notice his state and start to head towards him. Something was different about the way he walked, but that wasn't what Claw was paying attention to. Gloom's face held an eerily familiar emotion, something that Claw felt time and time again as his brothers and sisters long past. Grief and anguish. On death's door, he could only watch as he saw Gloom release tears. Claw's thoughts at that moment wanted to be put into words that could be understood by Gloom. Sure, he may be dying, but Gloom is alive and with such a great victory over it. If he hadn't rushed in a glory-crazed state, no one would have had to die. It was his fault. Gloom no longer had to worry about him anymore. But these thoughts went unsaid, especially since moving his tongue had become harder than ever. His vision faded to black. He could no longer see anything. He had hoped he might have made enough of an impression on the gods to let him have a place, having his fill of fees and, due to spell, regenerate, effect dying has been reduced to effect major wound. What? Alright then, that's acceptable. Claw's vision came back in from black. Color began to fill his vision as he saw Gloom pour himself into him. He could finally feel below his neck after a crack in it. His organs began to flow back into his body as his blood began pooling, and his skin and muscle grew back in. Claw couldn't believe his eyes. He had found a shaman. It was such a rare occurrence that his clan only had about 2 clansmen become them within his entire history. After a while, he finally decided to check on our Gloom, but it looked like he'd passed out. Claw decided to get up. He needed to think. As he stood up on his legs, he carefully made sure the shaman Gloom was not inconvenienced. He walked towards the beast and had decided to intrude upon him at his shaman's spot, and tore into him. It was twitching anyway, so he wasn't too sure whether or not it could recover, but after it stopped moving, he decided to eat further. After eating his fill, he decided to find water. Afterwards, he would lead Gloom to it, of course, but right now he needed something to parch this thirst after battle. As he walked through the forest and smelled of the water, he thought on what had heard. It wasn't something that was unknown to clan history. A long time ago, the voice had spoken to a few of the clans, before they settled off in places unknown. Other times, it was when a change occurred within an individual. He'd never heard the elder's voice before. He doubted he might ever hear it again. So, he decided upon something. He would not eat Gloom's kin. Doing so now, after being saved twice, only deemed him dishonorable. He would follow Gloom for a while longer, wherever Gloom might live. It might end up being a good hunting spot. He took the elder's voice appearance as a sign of good fortune for the creature. So after a bit, he noticed that the sun had come up. Sure, it wasn't all too impressive, but to Claw, it felt like many moons had passed before being able to see the sky in its bright glory. Sure, he might have appreciated the nights better, but neither the moons were out, so he couldn't have cared much less. Along his way to his destination, he began to feel something occur within his body. It wasn't the usual stomach grumbling, though. This felt like sickness. Oh, he recalled all too late what exactly caused the beast's death. It was sickness. Eating things that contained sickness usually caused sickness. Maybe, if he wasn't able to drink a lot of water, he might throw it up. He couldn't know for sure until, event. You have ingested a magical agent. Since this is your first encounter with this specific agent, you are undergoing an evolution event. There's a chance of error. Due to the spell regenerate, specific agent does not appear compatible with your current state. Secondary compatible agent found. Chance of death, error. Due to lucky influence, chance of death has been reduced to 0. Would you like to evolve? This wasn't supposed to happen. What is this? Claw was ecstatic at the message. 2 occurrences from the elder voice within the same day. That was unheard of, even in clan history. This is what people talked about. This was the change. Claw couldn't even begin to say no, especially for some reason. There was no risk involved at all. So, without further hesitation, he barked an affirmative. Affirmation received, commencing body modification. Claw began to feel the changes occurring within his body. Flesh was rearranging and his senses were changing. His injuries no longer mattered in the grand scheme of things, since his entire body was being shifted around a core concept, a core being. His limbs were changing shape and size. His vision had been enhanced. He could see colors and things which he could not before. Even his mind changed. Where before it was stuck in the simplest idea of the world, now he was aware, all too aware, of what was occurring around him. Where before he couldn't care less about his surroundings, now his surroundings were the only thing he could keep focus on. He could see the flow of some kind. It was going through him as well as other things. The animals excreted it, the plants absorbed it. Most of all, he could feel more from the sunlight hitting upon him. Where before it was warm sensation that felt akin to a restful slumber, this now felt energizing, like he could take on the world. However, doing this didn't have its downsides. When before he felt thirsty from too long without water, now he felt parched. Everything inside of him was somewhat dry. He didn't know what that meant, but he knew it probably wasn't good. Usually, blood was wet and needed to be kept inside the body. He needed to get water quickly. So, with these new senses, he found a source of water much faster than before. It almost seemed like his fur itself pointed towards the right direction of water, which was confirmed when he lay down on it. His fur seemed to absorb some of the water below him. He felt dry though, so he started lapping up as much water as he could. It was a bit of a strange new sensation though. Where before he could lap water straight to his throat, there was now no throat to go to. Puzzled at first, then he noticed something new. There was a hole in his tongue, and he could just suck water through it, and it felt like it was going in the right place. Congratulations on evolving into a timber Murafasa. Why though? Why does this beast turn into a... Claw was excited to learn about what he is. He hadn't heard about this particular change before though. Usually, they'd have some kind of bigger build, sharper fangs, tougher skin, sometimes even longer legs and better hunting strategies. This wasn't one of those stories, which he now recognized were just simple stories. Where before the history seemed like a sure thing, he now realized that telling could be changed over time, maybe with some errors or things that which occur. He felt he was better in control of his faculties. Where before he thought wavering from one thing to the other, he now was able to focus on individual things. However, even with that new focus, whenever he tried to form a plan, nothing really came to mind. Now that he no longer needed to hunt, what use was there in making plans? What would be his purpose in life? A very quiet voice inside of him said to try and fix himself. If he no longer felt hunger, he was no longer natural. But another thought of something else, and it was a much bigger part of himself. Why did he get this evolution, which he now realized was the proper wording for some reason? He ate the beast's poison meat, which now he also realized was a physical thing rather than an illness. There were a lot of things that he now realized about himself and his surroundings that he had not thought of before. After eating it, the elder voice had stated that he would probably die from eating it, if it had not been for the shaman. And then there was that ability it stated. Claw was sure that he didn't have that kind of ability within him. Nothing in him screamed at the concept of luck of all things. It was, once again, his shaman's help. His shaman. He hadn't realized he'd gotten so protective of the little creature, but he realized that why shouldn't he be? Without the little shaman, he would be dead twice over, as well as, without this change, that happened for the better. He modified his earlier plans a little bit. He would protect the little shaman with his life. It was only fair, after all, for all that he'd done. So without a second thought, he went back to drinking his fill. It was a bit after that he realized he could still drink a lot more within his body. It felt like, even though he was no longer dry, that he could fill the space within himself with water. With nothing better to do, and figuring that Gloom was probably still asleep, he resigned himself to continue drinking until his new cave within himself was filled with water. And he would probably do so the entire day, were it not for some tingling sensation that he could feel in his head. It wasn't really a physical sensation. It was more like a kind of feeling he had whenever something had seen him on the hunt. It seemed more heightened now, though, which, we supposed, was a good thing. Usually, better senses led to better chances. So he looked up to find Gloom, alive and well, and drinking his fill. At first, Claw wanted to go over and make sure that there was no, debilitating injuries. Judging from his weirdly colored leg bit, he probably had a lot of bruising. Or maybe he lost a lot of blood in the fight and his shamanistic rituals he performed. Then he realized something. Would Gloom have recognized him? He did seem a bit different now. Where before he barely was taller than the shaman himself, now he seemed to tower over him. He was also covered entirely in some, green stuff, and probably made up of green stuff now. So he wouldn't be used to any of it. Thus Claw got stuck with the problem on how he was exactly meant to get across who he was. Ability animal companionship is taking effect. Really? You're really going to do this after all that build-up? You're just going to undercut it like that? You're not even giving the chance to refuse it. Why do I work with such a... Claw didn't necessarily understand what was happening at this point in time. He understood that it was probably another thing that the little shaman had access to. It probably wasn't for the ill either, considering companion was in the name of the ability. He wondered what exactly he should do at this point in time, when he heard something. Calm, peace, friend, stone. Claw didn't understand what was going on, but he could tell that maybe Gloom didn't either. His face stated that he couldn't really comprehend the barks and yips coming through his mouth. Yes, it is me, friend. Did you literally call me Stone the entire time we were together? Together? Stone? Big now? What? That's not my name, Gloom, but fine. You may call me whatever you like. Stone? No. What name? I was bestowed a name Claw for my sharp strikes. Then again, a new form probably requires a new name. What are your ideas? You know name self? No, that's wrong. If we are to name ourselves, it would be the biggest lie that we could tell ourselves. No honor or humility in naming ourselves. Understand little, but no to naming. Yes. Plant, maybe? It is what I am now, so I do not mind something that is simplified. I have yet to really develop any characteristics besides that with this new body of mine. Is your name Gloom? Gloom? What Gloom? Name friend. HIATUS, the newly named plant, had to snicker. The one who had been following him, who had been caring for him, was named for what he does. So, how are you talking to me? Ability? Yeah, Plant didn't really understand most of what he said. He probably wouldn't until Friend got a better hang of speaking, but he understood that he was doing this on his own. Plant was probably going to. So I'm kind of aimless, as most of the plans I've had usually revolve around getting food to eat. Now that I don't need to eat, I don't really have much of a will to do anything. Any ideas, friend? We leave the forest, make friends. Plants could tell from the subtext that he could also probably tell one other thing. Whatever's to happen, he'd stay with Friend, even if he might not be able to have children anymore, which he probably couldn't now that he was a plant. He realized that there was a second way of living through others, stories. He was sure that no matter where they went, he and Friend would go on many noble hunts together. Maybe even the clansman would tell stories of his adventures. Yes, that was the word that they'd used. That was the word in which he'll strive to fulfill. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you do, please consider supporting the author, even by popping over and leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment, just to show your appreciation for the story. However, if you wish to support this channel, there are links down below which will help immensely. I will see you all in the next one, and until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Cheers.